The boardroom fell silent when Tessa Grant announced she was leaving her position as Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Matchmaking Services, the most successful relationship consulting firm on the East Coast, to work directly with clients as a matchmaker. Her assistant dropped a stack of folders, the sound echoing through the stunned room like a gunshot. "You're joking," said Marcus, her chief financial officer, his face pale. "Tessa, you built this company from nothing. Why would you step down to do field work?" Tessa looked around the polished mahogany table at the executives who had helped her build a multi-million-dollar empire over the past 8 years. At 32, she had accomplished everything she had set out to do in the business world. Sterling Matchmaking had offices in 12 cities, a client list that included celebrities and politicians, and a success rate that made competitors weep with envy. But lately, the spreadsheets and strategy meetings had felt hollow. "Because I forgot why I started this company in the first place," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I wanted to help people find love, real, lasting love, and I cannot do that from behind a desk reviewing quarterly reports." The transition took 3 months. Tessa promoted Marcus to CEO, restructured the leadership team, and created a new role for herself that would allow her to work directly with a select number of high-profile clients. She kept her ownership stake in her office, but her days would now be spent in coffee shops, art galleries, and restaurants, carefully orchestrating introductions that could change lives. Her first client under this new arrangement was Alexander York, and he arrived at her office on a gray November morning with the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their posture. He was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he wore slightly longer than typical for a man in his position. His suit was custom-tailored, probably Italian, and his handshake was firm without being aggressive. "Miss Grant," he said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to resonate in her chest. "I appreciate you taking me on personally. I know your time is valuable. Call me Tessa, please, and your assistant was very persuasive when she reached out." She gestured to the chairs arranged around a small table by the window, deliberately avoiding the formal setup of her desk. "Can I offer you coffee? Tea, coffee black." He settled into the chair with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of people. "I should be upfront with you. I am skeptical about this entire process." Tessa poured coffee from the French press she kept on the sidebar, noting the way he watched her with sharp, intelligent eyes. Alexander York owned York Industrial Solutions, a manufacturing conglomerate that had revolutionized sustainable building materials. She had done her research. The man was worth approximately $400 million, had been featured on the cover of Forbes twice, and according to every article she had read, was married to his work. "Most of my clients are skeptical at first," she said, handing him the cup. "They think matchmaking is either outdated or superficial. They assume I will flip through headshots and set them up based on looks and income brackets." "Is that not what you do?" His lips quirked slightly, not quite a smile, not even close. "I spend time understanding who you are, what you value, what kind of life you want to build. Then I use my network and resources to find people who align with that vision. It is not about perfection. It is about compatibility and potential." Alexander took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "My assistant, Rachel, thinks I need help because I have not been on a date in 2 years. She is probably right, though I would never admit that to her." "Why 2 years?" "I was in a relationship that ended badly." She wanted the lifestyle my money could provide, not the life I actually live. When I realized that, it was too late. I had already wasted 3 years. He set down the cup with a soft click. I work 70 hours a week, Miss Grant. Tessa, I travel constantly. I live in a renovated factory building because I like the history and the exposed brick, not in some penthouse. I read biographies and technical manuals for fun. I am not an easy match. Tessa leaned back in her chair, warming to the challenge. Tell me what a perfect Saturday would look like for you. He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. I suppose I would sleep until 7, which is late for me. Go for a run along the harbor. Spend a few hours in my workshop building something with my hands. Maybe grab lunch at the diner near my place, the one that makes excellent hash browns. Read. Watch a documentary, nothing glamorous. And if you had someone to share that day with, Alexander was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. I would want her to come running with me, even if she was slower. I would want her to sit in my workshop and read while I worked, just being there. I would want to argue with her about the documentary afterward, debate the finer points over terrible wine. That is not hard to find, Tessa said softly. That is beautiful. Over the next 2 hours, they talked about his childhood in Ohio, his parents who still lived in the same house he grew up in, his younger sister who taught elementary school. He spoke about building his company from a small inheritance, and a loan, the risks he had taken, the failures that had taught him more than any success. Tessa took notes, but mostly she listened, watching the way his face animated when he discussed his work, the slight frown that appeared when he mentioned his ex-girlfriend. I will be honest with you, she said as their meeting wound down. This will take time. I do not do quick fixes or surface-level matches. I am going to need you to trust me, to be open to meeting people who might not be your usual type. I do not have a type. That is part of the problem. Everyone has a type. They just do not always recognize it. She stood, extending her hand. Give me 2 weeks. I will set up your first introduction. Alexander shook her hand, his grip warm and solid. 2 weeks. I will try to keep an open mind. After he left, Tessa sat at her desk and stared at her notes. Something about Alexander York had gotten under her skin in a way that clients rarely did. Maybe it was the vulnerability he had shown beneath the CEO exterior, or the way he spoke about wanting someone to argue about documentaries with. Whatever it was, she felt an unusual determination to find him someone extraordinary. She spent the next 10 days combing through her database, reaching out to contacts, conducting preliminary interviews. She considered and rejected a dozen possibilities. Too superficial, too career-focused, too interested in his money. On the 11th day, she met with a woman named Claire who worked as an architect specializing in sustainable design. Claire was intelligent, warm, shared Alexander's values about environmental responsibility. She seemed perfect. The introduction was set for a Saturday afternoon at a small art gallery that was featuring an exhibit on industrial photography. Tessa arrived early to ensure everything was in place. She had choreographed the meeting carefully. Alexander would arrive first, giving him time to look at the photographs. Claire would come 15 minutes later. Tessa would make the introduction, stay for a polite 10 minutes, then excuse herself. Alexander showed up exactly on time, wearing jeans and a navy sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. Tessa felt an odd flutter in her stomach when she saw him, which she immediately dismissed as nervousness about the introduction. "This place is perfect," he said, looking around at the black and white photographs of factories and warehouses. "How did you know?" "I pay attention," Tessa said. "Claire should be here in about 15 minutes. She is an architect, 33, originally from Seattle. She designs eco-friendly buildings. I think you will have a lot to talk about. You seem confident." "I am good at what I do." They walked through the gallery together, and Tessa found herself genuinely enjoying his commentary on the photographs. He pointed out architectural details she had missed, told stories about similar buildings he had renovated. When Claire arrived, looking lovely in a green dress and leather jacket, Tessa made the introduction with her practiced ease. "Alexander York, this is Claire Morrison. Claire, Alexander. You both share a passion for sustainable design, and I thought you might enjoy discussing the exhibit together." She watched them shake hands, saw Claire's smile, Alexander's polite attention. She stayed for the promised 10 minutes, facilitating the initial conversation, then excused herself as planned. As she walked out of the gallery, she glanced back to see them standing in front of a photograph, talking animatedly. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, she felt hollow. Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander reported back on his dates with Claire. They had gone well. She was lovely, intelligent, easy to talk to. They had similar values and interests. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. Tessa should have been thrilled. "But," Alexander said during their check-in meeting, and Tessa's attention sharpened. "But what?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was starting to recognize as his tell for frustration. "I do not know. There is nothing wrong. She is wonderful. I just do not feel the spark." "Is that ridiculous? Am I expecting too much?" Tessa felt relief flood through her, which was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. "It is not ridiculous at all. Chemistry is not logical. You can check all the boxes and still not feel it. Let me keep looking. I feel like an ass." "She really is great. She will find someone who sees her as more than great. You do not owe anyone a relationship, Alexander." He looked at her with those sharp eyes, and Tessa felt exposed in a way that made her want to squirm. "You are good at this. At making people feel like their feelings are valid. Because they are." Over the next 3 months, Tessa introduced Alexander to 5 more women. Each introduction was carefully planned. Each woman was accomplished, interesting, compatible on paper. And each time, Alexander reported back with the same conclusion: wonderful, but no spark. Tessa told herself she was just being thorough, that finding the right match sometimes took time. She refused to examine why she felt secretly pleased each time things did not work out. During this time, she and Alexander fell into a routine of meeting every 2 weeks to discuss his matches and refine her search. The meetings gradually became less formal, stretching from the scheduled hour to 2 hours, sometimes 3. They started meeting at a coffee shop near his office instead of hers, sitting in worn leather chairs with overpriced lattes, talking about everything except matchmaking. She learned that he was dyslexic and had struggled in school until a teacher recognized his intelligence and taught him coping strategies. That his father had been a factory worker who had died when Alexander was 25, leaving him a small life insurance policy that had funded his first business venture. That he had a pathological hatred of pretension, and once walked out of a Michelin-starred restaurant because the waiter corrected his pronunciation of an appetizer. He learned that she had started her matchmaking company after watching her sister go through a devastating divorce, determined to help people find better matches than dating apps and bar hookups could provide. That she loved terrible reality television as a guilty pleasure. That she had never been in a serious relationship because she had poured all her energy into building her business and now worried she had forgotten how to let someone in. "That is the saddest thing I have ever heard," Alexander said one afternoon in early March. Rain pattered against the coffee shop windows and the air smelled of espresso and wet wool. "It is not sad, it is practical." Tessa wrapped her hands around her cup, defensive. "I made a choice to prioritize my career. You made a choice to hide behind your career. There is a difference." His voice was gentle, not accusatory, which somehow made it worse. That is rich coming from the man who has not had a successful relationship in years. Fair point. He grinned, and Tessa felt her irritation dissolve. We are both disasters, at least we are self-aware disasters. Speak for yourself. I am a highly successful disaster. The best kind. It was during that conversation, with rain and laughter and the comfortable silence that followed, that Tessa realized she was in trouble. She was developing feelings for her client. Real, inconvenient, completely unprofessional feelings. She had built walls around herself for years, telling herself she was too busy, too focused, that she would make time for love eventually. But Alexander had somehow slipped through those defenses with his honesty and his terrible coffee shop jokes, and the way he listened to her like what she said actually mattered. She needed to fix this. Fast. I have someone new for you to meet, she said abruptly, cutting off whatever Alexander had been saying. Her name is Nina. She is an environmental engineer. I think she might be the one. Alexander blinked at the sudden subject change. Okay, sure, when? I will set it up for this weekend. Tessa threw herself into preparing for the introduction with desperate energy. Nina was perfect for Alexander. She had to be. They shared values, interests, work ethics. They were both serious people who valued substance over flash. If this match worked, Tessa could step back. Let Alexander find happiness with someone appropriate, and forget these inconvenient feelings that had snuck up on her. The date was set for a Saturday evening at a farm-to-table restaurant that specialized in sustainable cuisine. Tessa was not supposed to be there. Her role was to make the introduction and step back. But she found herself sitting in her car across the street, watching through the restaurant window like some kind of stalker. She saw Alexander arrive, saw Nina a few minutes later. Watched them shake hands and sit down. She should leave. This was insane, but she could not seem to make herself start the car. Her phone rang, making her jump. Rachel, Alexander's assistant. Hello, Rachel. Is everything all right? I was going to ask you the same thing. Mr. York just texted me asking me to call him in 20 minutes with a fake emergency. That is never a good sign on a date. Tessa should have felt sympathy for Nina, disappointment at another failed match. Instead, she felt a guilty relief that made her ashamed. I will follow up with him. Thank you for letting me know. She finally drove home, poured herself a large glass of wine, and admitted the truth she had been avoiding. She had feelings for Alexander York. Real, deep, terrifying feelings that went far beyond professional interest or friendly affection. She was falling in love with him, had maybe been falling since that first meeting when he talked about wanting someone to argue about documentaries with. But she was his matchmaker. He had hired her to find him love, not to develop feelings for him herself. It was unethical, probably a violation of a dozen professional codes. She had built her entire company on trust and discretion. Getting involved with a client would compromise everything she had worked for. She would have to refer him to another matchmaker. It was the only solution. She would recommend someone excellent, explain that she had a conflict of interest, maintain her professional integrity. It would hurt, but it was the right thing to do. She composed the email 3 times before sending it, each version more carefully worded than the last. She explained that she felt she was no longer the best fit for his search, that she was recommending a colleague who specialized in high-profile clients, that it had been a pleasure working with him. She kept it professional, cordial, distant. Alexander called her 10 minutes after she sent the email. What the hell is this? His voice was tight, angry in a way she had never heard from him. It is what I said. I think you would be better served by another matchmaker. Jessica Chen is excellent. She has even more experience than I do with. I do not want Jessica Chen. I want you. Did I do something wrong? No, of course not. This is not about you. Then what is it about? Because this feels like you are firing me as a client, and I would like to know why. Tessa pressed her fingers to her forehead, feeling a headache building. I just think it would be better. Trust me. I have trusted you for months, Tessa. I have told you things I have not told anyone, and now you are passing me off to someone else with no real explanation. That is not okay. I am sorry, I really am, but this is how it needs to be. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Alexander spoke again, his voice was quiet or hurt. Okay, if that is what you want. It is not about what I want, it is about what is right. Right. He said the word like he did not believe her. Good luck, Tessa. He hung up before she could respond. Tessa sat with the phone in her hand, feeling like she had just made a terrible mistake but knowing it was necessary. She would get over this. She would find another client to focus on. Pour her energy back into the business. Forget about the way Alexander made her laugh, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and the way she felt like her best self when they talked. She lasted 4 days. On the 4th day, Alexander showed up at her office at 7 in the morning. Her assistant was not in yet, but Tessa was already at her desk, working through emails with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She looked up to find him standing in her doorway, and her heart did an uncomfortable flip in her chest. We need to talk, he said. Alexander, what are you doing here, proving that you are wrong? He walked into her office and closed the door behind him. You said referring me to someone else was about what was right, but I do not think it is. I think it is about you being scared. That is not fair. You do not know, you have spent the last 6 months teaching me to be honest about my feelings, to recognize when something matters, to stop making excuses and go after what I want. He crossed to her desk, bracing his hands on the polished wood and leaning toward her. So I am taking your advice. What I want is not another matchmaker. It is not the women you have been introducing me to, no matter how perfect they are on paper. What I want is you. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. You cannot say that. I am your matchmaker. You are. And you are also the person I think about when I wake up in the morning, the person I find excuses to text during the day, the person whose opinion I value more than anyone else's. The person who makes me laugh and challenges me and sees me as more than just the guy who owns a company. His eyes were intense, unwavering. Tell me you do not feel this too. Tell me I am wrong and I will walk out of here and never bother you again. But do not lie to me, Tessa. You are too honest for that. She should tell him he was wrong, should maintain professional distance, protect the reputation she had built, do the safe thing. But looking at him, at the vulnerability in his expression and the hope in his eyes, she could not make herself lie. You are not wrong, she whispered. But this is complicated. You hired me to find you love. What kind of matchmaker falls for her own client, the human kind? Alexander moved around the desk, and suddenly he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I do not care about complications. I care about you, about us. I have been on a dozen first dates in the past 6 months, and none of them felt as right as having coffee with you. Does not that tell you something? It tells me we are both idiots who do not know what is good for us. Or maybe it tells us we have been looking for love in all the wrong places when it was right in front of us the whole time. Tessa laughed, a shaky sound that was half sob. That is the cheesiest thing you have ever said. I know. I have been practicing. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and cupped her face in his hands. Tell me to leave. Tell me you do not want this. I cannot, she admitted. Because I do want this, I want you. I have wanted you for months, and I have been terrified because it was so unprofessional and complicated, and he kissed her. cutting off her spiral into anxiety with his mouth on hers. It was not a tentative first kiss. It was certain and claiming, the kiss of someone who had been waiting a long time and was done being patient. Tessa melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "So what do we do now? I suppose I officially refer you to another matchmaker. Create a paper trail showing I removed myself from your case due to personal involvement. Make sure everything is above board. And then you ask me on a proper date, not a coffee shop meeting. Not a professional consultation. A date." Alexander grinned, and it transformed his entire face. "Tessa Grant, would you like to have dinner with me this Saturday?" "I would love to." Her assistant arrived 30 minutes later to find them still in Tessa's office, sitting on opposite sides of the desk, but holding hands across it like teenagers. If she thought anything of it, she was too professional to comment. Word spread quickly through Sterling Matchmaking that Tessa had become personally involved with a client. There were whispers, raised eyebrows, a few knowing smiles from employees who had watched her and Alexander meet for months. Tessa handled it head-on, calling a company-wide meeting to address the situation directly. "I want to be transparent about what has happened," she told the gathered staff. "I developed feelings for a client, which is something I counsel all our matchmakers to avoid. When I recognized those feelings, I immediately removed myself from his case and referred him to another professional. I have documented everything properly, but I also want to acknowledge that this puts me in a difficult position as the founder of this company. I teach you all to maintain professional boundaries, and I failed to do that myself." Marcus raised his hand. "Did you find him love?" Tessa blinked. "What? Your job was to find him love. Did you do that?" "I suppose I did, just not in the way anyone expected." "Then I would say you succeeded." "Seems like excellent marketing, actually. Our matchmakers are so good, even our CEO could not resist." The room erupted in laughter, and Tessa felt tension she had not realized she was carrying ease from her shoulders. They would be okay. The company would be okay. She had not ruined everything by falling for Alexander. Their first official date was at the diner near Alexander's apartment, the one with the excellent hash browns. Tessa showed up in jeans and a sweater, her hair in a ponytail, no makeup beyond mascara. She had spent her entire professional life being polished and put together. With Alexander, she wanted to be real. He was waiting in a booth by the window, and his smile when he saw her was worth every moment of anxiety and doubt she had experienced over the past week. "You came," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. "Did you think I would not? I kept waiting for you to change your mind, decide this was too messy or too complicated." Tessa reached across the table and took his hand. "It is messy and complicated, but I have spent my entire adult life playing it safe, building walls, telling myself I would make time for love later. And then you walked into my office and made me realize that later needs to be now." They ordered hash browns and terrible coffee and talked for 3 hours. Not about business or matchmaking or anything professional. They talked about childhood memories and embarrassing stories and dreams they had never told anyone. Alexander told her about the workshop he had built in his apartment, the half-finished projects that littered every surface. Tessa admitted she had a collection of snow globes from every city she had visited, which she thought was tacky but could not stop adding to. When Alexander walked her to her car, he kissed her goodnight with a sweetness that made her knees weak. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked against her lips. "I have meetings all day. Dinner then, my place, I will cook." "You cook?" "I have been hiding my talents. I make an excellent pasta carbonara." "Then yes, absolutely yes." Over the next 3 months, Tessa and Alexander fell into a relationship with the kind of ease that only comes when two people have already built a foundation of friendship and trust. They had done the work of getting to know each other during all those coffee shop meetings, learning each other's patterns and quirks and values. Now, they got to add romance to that foundation. Alexander did cook excellent pasta carbonara. He also made terrible dad jokes, sang off-key in the shower, and fell asleep during movies no matter how action-packed they were. He brought her coffee every morning at exactly 7:30, remembered her sister's birthday before she did, and left sticky notes with terrible drawings around her apartment. Tessa learned that he was ticklish right below his ribs, that he had a secret sweet tooth for gummy bears, and that he cried during nature documentaries when animals died. She discovered that being loved by Alexander York meant being challenged and supported in equal measure. He pushed her to take risks, to be vulnerable, to stop hiding behind professionalism. But he also held her when she was anxious, listened when she needed to vent, and never made her feel like she had to be anything other than herself. They had their first fight 4 months into dating over something stupid. Tessa had spent all day dealing with a difficult client and came home exhausted. Alexander wanted to go out to dinner with friends. She snapped at him, he got defensive, and suddenly they were arguing about nothing and everything. "I am trying to be understanding," Alexander said, his voice tight, "but you cannot shut me out every time you have a bad day. I am not shutting you out, I am tired. You are shutting me out. You do this thing where you get overwhelmed and pull back, like you are trying to protect me from your stress. But I am not fragile, Tessa. I can handle you being human." She stared at him, feeling exposed and defensive. "I do not know how to do this, how to let someone in when I am not at my best." His expression softened immediately. "I know, but you are learning. We both are. Just talk to me, okay? Tell me when you are having a hard day instead of pretending everything is fine." "I had a terrible day. I am exhausted and stressed and I do not want to go out. I want to order pizza and watch bad television and fall asleep on the couch." "See, that was not so hard." He pulled her into his arms and she felt the tension drain from her body. "Pizza and bad television sounds perfect." They ordered from the place down the street and watched 3 episodes of a reality show about people who bought houses in foreign countries. Tessa fell asleep with her head on Alexander's shoulder, feeling safe in a way she had never experienced before. 6 months into their relationship, Alexander invited her to meet his mother and sister. They flew to Ohio for a long weekend, and Tessa was more nervous than she had been for any business presentation. "What if they hate me?" she asked as they drove through Columbus in a rental car. "They will not hate you. My mother has already decided she loves you based on the fact that you make me happy." "That is a low bar," Alexander laughed. "You have not met my mother. Her bar is extremely high." Linda York was a force of nature, a 60-year-old woman with Alexander's eyes and a smile that could light up a room. She hugged Tessa the moment they walked through the door, holding on long enough that it felt genuine. "I am so glad to finally meet you," she said, pulling back to study Tessa's face. "Alex has talked about you nonstop. I was starting to think you were too good to be true." "I am definitely not too good to be true. I am actually kind of a mess. Good. Perfect people are boring." Linda linked her arm through Tessa's and led her into the kitchen. "Come help me with dinner. Alex is useless in the kitchen, despite what he has told you." Alexander's sister, Emma, arrived an hour later with her husband and 2 kids. She was warm and funny, with an ease around her brother that spoke of genuine affection. The kids, ages 7 and 5, immediately climbed all over Alexander, demanding stories and piggyback rides. Watching him with his niece and nephew, laughing and patient and completely unself-conscious, Tessa felt something shift in her chest. She could see a future with this man. Not just dating, but building a life. Marriage and maybe kids and growing old together. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. That night, lying in the guest room of Alexander's childhood home, she whispered, "I love you." Alexander rolled over to face her in the darkness. "Say that again." "I love you. I have loved you for a while, I think. Maybe since that first day when you talked about wanting someone to argue about documentaries with." "I love you too," he kissed her softly. "I have been waiting to say that, scared I would spook you if I said it too soon. I am pretty spooked, but in a good way. The best way." They flew back to Boston the next day, and Tessa felt different. Lighter. Like she had been carrying a weight she had not realized was there and had finally set it down. She had spent so long protecting herself, keeping people at arm's length, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be fully known and loved anyway. A year into their relationship, Alexander asked her to move in with him. They were at the diner, their spot, eating hash browns at noon on a Saturday. "My lease is up in 2 months," he said casually. "I was thinking of looking for a new place, something bigger. I thought you loved your apartment. I do, but it is not big enough for 2 people, not comfortably. And I would like to find something we could make ours, not just mine that you moved into." Tessa set down her fork, her heart racing. "Are you asking me to move in with you? I am asking if you want to find a place together, make a home together. Wake up next to you every morning and argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash, and all the mundane domestic things I never thought I would want. That is the most unromantic romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Is that a yes?" "That is absolutely a yes." They found a brownstone in the South End with high ceilings and original hardwood floors and a kitchen that got morning light. It needed work, but Alexander could see the potential, and Tessa loved the built-in bookshelves in what would be their bedroom. They spent 3 months renovating, making decisions about paint colors and cabinet hardware, and whether to keep the vintage light fixtures. Tessa had never lived with a boyfriend before, and she was surprised by how easy it was. Alexander left his socks everywhere and always forgot to cap the toothpaste, but he also made the bed every morning and did the dishes without being asked. They developed routines: coffee together before work, dinner at home at least 4 nights a week, Sunday mornings in bed reading the newspaper. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Sterling Matchmaking continued to thrive under Marcus's leadership, and Tessa found she did not miss being CEO at all. She kept her client roster small, focusing on people who needed personal attention and careful matchmaking. She had become something of a legend in the industry, the matchmaker who had found love while looking for it on behalf of someone else. People reached out requesting her services specifically because of her story with Alexander. She should have found it invasive, but instead, she found it funny. "We have become a walking advertisement," she told Alexander one night over dinner. "Could be worse. At least we are advertising something that actually worked." Fair point. On their 2-year anniversary, Alexander took her back to the art gallery where they had first met, or rather, where she had first introduced him to Claire. The industrial photography exhibit was long gone, replaced by abstract paintings in bold colors. They walked through the gallery hand in hand, and Tessa thought about how much had changed since that day. "I have a confession," Alexander said as they stopped in front of a painting that looked like nothing more than red and blue smears. "What is that?" "I knew." Tessa turned to look at him. "Knew what?" "That I was interested in you. Not Claire. That first day when you introduced us, I was so focused on you that I barely registered what Claire looked like. I went through all those dates you set up because I thought maybe I was imagining it, that what I felt when I was with you was just because you were easy to talk to. But it was never just that. Why did you not say anything? Because you were my matchmaker. You were doing your job. And I figured if you felt anything for me, you would say something. When you referred me to someone else, I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing, that I was just a client to you and nothing more. You were never just a client, Tessa said softly. You were trouble from the moment you walked into my office. The best kind of trouble. The absolute best kind. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the gallery, and Tessa's breath caught in her throat. A few other people in the space stopped to watch, but she barely noticed them. All she could see was Alexander, looking up at her with love and certainty in his eyes. Tessa Grant, you have spent your career helping other people find love. You taught me to be honest about my feelings, to recognize when something matters, to stop making excuses. You showed me that love is not about perfection. It is about finding someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. You are my best friend, my partner, my home. Will you marry me? He opened a small velvet box to reveal a ring, a simple oval diamond on a platinum band. It was exactly what she would have chosen for herself. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, absolutely yes. Alexander slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that earned applause from the other gallery visitors. Tessa laughed against his mouth, feeling joy burst through her like champagne bubbles. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the brownstone they had renovated together. Emma was Tessa's maid of honor, and Marcus stood up for Alexander. Linda cried through the entire ceremony, and the kids dropped the rings twice, but everyone pretended not to notice. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to choose each other every day, to argue about documentaries and eat hash browns and build a life together. At the reception, Rachel stood up to give a toast. I have worked for Alexander for 8 years, she said, raising her glass. And in that time, I watched him pour everything into his company. He was brilliant and driven and completely alone. When I convinced him to hire a matchmaker, I honestly did not think it would work. But Tessa, you did not just find him a match, you matched him back into life. Thank you for making my boss human again. And significantly harder to schedule meetings with, someone called out, earning a laugh. That too, Rachel agreed. To Tessa and Alexander, may you continue to make each other late for everything. A year after the wedding, Tessa woke up feeling nauseous for the 3rd morning in a row. She stared at the bathroom ceiling, doing mental math, and felt her heart start to race. She stopped at a pharmacy on her way to work and took the test in her office bathroom, hands shaking, pregnant. She sat on the closed toilet lid, staring at the 2 pink lines, feeling a riot of emotions. They had talked about kids, in the abstract way of people who were not quite ready yet but knew they wanted them eventually. But now it was real, and Tessa felt terrified and thrilled in equal measure. She called Alexander, her voice shaking. Can you come to my office? What is wrong? Are you okay? I am fine. I just need you to come, please. He arrived 20 minutes later, breathless from what must have been a sprint from his building to hers. What happened? Tessa held out the pregnancy test without a word. Alexander stared at it, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to wonder in the space of seconds. You are pregnant. I am pregnant. We are having a baby. We are having a baby. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears on his face. This is the best news. This is the best possible news. You are not scared. I am terrified, but I am also happier than I have ever been. Their daughter was born 8 months later on a snowy February evening. They named her Grace Linda York, and she had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Alexander cried when he held her for the first time, and Tessa took a picture on her phone because she never wanted to forget the expression on his face. Being parents was harder than anything they had ever done. Grace did not sleep, which meant neither did they. The brownstone was constantly covered in burp cloths and tiny clothes and half-drunk cups of coffee. They argued about sleep schedules and feeding times and whose turn it was to change diapers. But they also spent hours just watching Grace sleep, marveling that they had created this tiny person who had her father's serious expression and her mother's determination. On their third wedding anniversary, they were too exhausted to go out to dinner. Instead, they ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the living room floor while Grace slept in her swing nearby. "This is not how I imagined celebrating our anniversary," Alexander said, picking a piece of pepperoni off his slice. "Are you disappointed?" "Not even a little bit. This is perfect." He leaned over to kiss her, tasting like pizza and home. "You are perfect. I am covered in spit up and have not slept more than 3 hours at a time in weeks. I am the opposite of perfect. You gave me a family. You gave me a life I did not know I could have. That is pretty damn perfect." Tessa rested her head on his shoulder, feeling Grace's weight in the room like a tiny anchor to the best parts of herself. She thought about the woman she had been 4 years ago, so focused on success and achievement that she had forgotten to live. She had thought she was giving up something when she left the CEO position to work as a matchmaker. But really, she had been finding her way toward this moment, this life, this love. "I am glad you were a skeptical client," she said softly. "I am glad you were a stubborn matchmaker." "I was not stubborn, I was thorough. You introduced me to 6 women before admitting you had feelings for me. That is stubborn. That is professional integrity. It is both." He kissed the top of her head, "and I love you for it." Grace made a small noise in her sleep, and they both turned to look at her, their daughter, their future. Tessa had spent years helping other people find love, believing she was too busy, too focused, too ambitious to find it for herself. But love had found her anyway, in the form of a skeptical CEO who wanted someone to argue about documentaries with. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James Alexander York, who had his mother's blonde hair and his father's calm temperament. Grace was delighted to have a sibling, though her enthusiasm was sometimes too vigorous for an infant. The brownstone felt full in the best way, with toys scattered across every surface and children's laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Tessa scaled back her client list even further, taking on only a handful of cases each year. Sterling Matchmaking continued to be successful under Marcus's leadership, expanding into new cities and breaking records for successful matches. She remained on the board and consulted on special cases, but her focus had shifted. She had built a business helping other people find love. Now she was building a life living in it. On Grace's 4th birthday, they threw a party in the backyard of the brownstone. Emma and her family came from Ohio, along with Linda, who had become a fixture in their lives, visiting every few months and calling weekly to check on her grandchildren. The yard was full of children running around, adults talking in clusters, the kind of beautiful chaos that comes with family gatherings. Alexander found Tessa in the kitchen, plating cupcakes with more precision than the occasion required. "They are 4-year-olds," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "They just want the frosting. I want them to look nice. They look perfect, just like the woman making them." Tessa turned in his arms to face him. "You know what I was thinking about." "What?" "That meeting in the art gallery. When I introduced you to Claire and walked away feeling hollow. I did not understand it at the time, but I was already falling for you. I was just too scared to admit it. Best professional lapse of judgment you ever made. The very best." She kissed him, tasting buttercream and coffee. "Thank you for being skeptical about matchmaking, for giving me 2 weeks, for showing up at my office and calling me out. Thank you for being brave enough to admit you felt it too, for taking a risk on something messy and complicated." It turned out pretty well. It turned out perfect. Through the window, they could see Grace helping James toddle across the yard, holding his hand with careful concentration. Linda was taking pictures, and Emma was setting up the birthday cake table. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, this life they had built together. Tessa had spent years believing love was something you found for other people, a service you provided, a business you ran. But love was not a service or a strategy. It was showing up every day and choosing each other. It was hash browns at the diner and terrible coffee and arguments about documentaries. It was being seen completely and loved anyway. She had set out to find Alexander York a match, never knowing she would end up matching herself into his life. And that had made all the difference. They had built something real and lasting, something that started with professional boundaries and coffee shop meetings, and grew into marriage and children, and a love that deepened with every passing year. As they carried the cupcakes outside to a chorus of children's cheers, Alexander caught her hand and squeezed. Tessa squeezed back, a silent conversation in the gesture. They had found each other against all odds, two people who had been looking in the wrong places until they realized love was right in front of them. It was the best match she had ever made.